I'm Olivia Bennett, 27, sitting at my family's dinner table when my brother Lucas smirked and said, "You have 1 week to leave." Mom and Dad just watched in silence, their eyes avoiding mine. The betrayal cut deep, but they had no idea what Grandpa and I had planned. The property records in my bag would wipe those smug expressions right off their faces. Blood might be thicker than water, but sometimes family can be your worst enemies. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on them, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Growing up in the sprawling Victorian farmhouse that had been in our family for 4 generations, I always felt a special connection to the place. The wraparound porch where Grandpa Theodore taught me to whittle wooden figurines. The massive oak tree with the tire swing that had witnessed countless summer days. The creek that cut through the back 40 acres where I'd catch crawdads while Lucas stayed inside playing video games. Grandpa Theodore was my hero. While my parents Rebecca and Thomas Bennett were busy building their real estate business and fawning over Lucas's every achievement, Grandpa was the one who showed up to my softball games and science fairs. He was the one who listened when I talked about my dreams of becoming an environmental architect. "Livy," he'd say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, "you've got your grandmother's spirit. Strong, determined. You see the value in things others miss." The contrast between how my parents treated Lucas and me couldn't have been more stark. When Lucas got a C in algebra, my parents hired a private tutor. When I got straight A's, they'd simply nod and say, "That's nice, dear." When Lucas wanted a car for his 16th birthday, they bought him a brand new Jeep. When I asked for help with college applications, they told me to figure it out myself. "You're the responsible one," my mother would say, as if my reliability was a burden rather than a virtue. Despite the obvious favoritism, I excelled. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, graduating with honors in architectural design with an emphasis on sustainable building. While Lucas dropped out of 3 different universities, blowing through his college fund and then some, I built a reputation at one of the top environmental architecture firms in Seattle. Meanwhile, Lucas lived in the pool house of our family home, supposedly working on a startup that never materialized beyond a hastily created website. My parents continued to bankroll his lifestyle, including his gambling habit that they pretended not to notice. Through it all, I maintained a close relationship with Grandpa Theodore. When his health began to decline 3 years ago, I was the one who drove 4 hours every other weekend to visit him. I brought his favorite black licorice and fresh magazines about classic cars. We'd sit on that same porch, now weathered by time, and he'd tell me stories about the property. "Your great-grandfather built this house with his bare hands after returning from World War I, he'd say, his voice growing wistful. "Every board has a story. Every acre has purpose." During those final months, as cancer slowly claimed him, our conversations took on a different tone. He started asking me specific questions about my career, my dreams for the future, and, surprisingly, my thoughts on the family property. "What would you do with this place, Livy, if it were yours?" he asked one crisp autumn afternoon, his blue eyes sharp despite his failing body. "I'd restore it," I answered honestly. "Keep its character, but make it sustainable. Solar panels, rainwater collection, a community garden in the south field. This place could be both a tribute to the past and a model for the future." He nodded slowly, a small smile playing at his lips. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." In his final weeks, when he was moved to hospice care, my visits became daily. My parents and Lucas made brief, obligatory appearances, checking their watches and scrolling through their phones while I sat holding Grandpa's hand, reading him poetry or simply sitting in comfortable silence. During one of his more lucid moments, just 3 days before he passed, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Livy," he whispered, "there's an envelope in my desk at home. Bottom drawer, taped under the false bottom. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it." I didn't understand the significance of his words then. I was too consumed by grief, too heartbroken watching this towering figure in my life slip away. When he passed peacefully in his sleep with me by his side, the mysterious conversation was temporarily forgotten in the fog of loss and funeral arrangements. What I didn't realize then was that Grandpa Theodore had set in motion a plan that would expose the true nature of my family and test my own resolve in ways I never imagined. The funeral was a somber affair held on the family property, with the autumn leaves creating a golden canopy over the mourners. I stood stoically as distant relatives and community members shared stories about Grandpa Theodore's generosity and wisdom. My parents performed their grief with practiced precision, accepting condolences with damp eyes that never seemed to produce actual tears. Lucas, dressed impeccably in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, kept checking his phone during the service. After the guests departed, I decided to stay at the family home for a week to help sort through Grandpa's belongings and process my grief. At first, my parents welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. "Of course you should stay, darling," my mother said, embracing me with the scent of expensive perfume. Family should be together during times like these. But that superficial warmth quickly cooled as the days progressed. I noticed subtle changes around the property that disturbed me. Grandpa's beloved workshop had been partially cleared out, his precision tools already listed for sale online. The antique roll-top desk where he wrote letters every Sunday had been moved to the garage, tagged for an estate sale. "Don't you think we should go through everything carefully?" I asked my father as he tossed a box of Grandpa's photographs into a donation pile. "There's no point in keeping all this clutter, Olivia," he replied without looking up. "The property needs to be updated if we want to maximize its value." That word, value, sent a chill through me. I'd always known my parents saw everything through the lens of potential profit, but hearing them apply that cold calculation to Grandpa's home so soon after his death felt particularly callous. Later that evening, I overheard Lucas speaking with a man in expensive boots who introduced himself as a developer. "The acreage is perfect," the man said, walking the perimeter of the back property with my brother. "We could easily fit 30 luxury homes on this parcel alone." 30? Lucas replied, visibly calculating the potential profit. The old man would roll in his grave if he knew. "Well, good thing we don't have to worry about that," the developer laughed, slapping Lucas on the back. I felt sick watching them carve up Grandpa's beloved land in their minds, plotting to erase his legacy before his memory had even begun to fade. When I confronted my mother about it later, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her manicured hand. "Your grandfather's gone, Olivia. This property is a financial asset, not a museum. We all need to be practical." "Practical?" I echoed. "Is that what you call disrespecting his memory less than a week after burying him?" My mother's eyes hardened. "Don't be dramatic. Lucas has some excellent ideas for the property that will benefit the whole family." It became increasingly clear that the whole family didn't include me in their vision. I noticed whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Significant looks exchanged between my parents and Lucas over dinner. One afternoon, I returned early from a walk to hear my father's voice from his study. "We need to deal with her soon," he was saying. "She's getting too attached to the place." "I'll handle it," Lucas replied confidently. "Just give me a few days to set everything up." Their words confirmed my growing suspicion that something wasn't right. That night, unable to sleep, I remembered Grandpa's mysterious instructions about the envelope in his desk. With the household asleep, I crept down to his study, which had miraculously escaped my mother's purging so far. The antique mahogany desk stood in the corner, illuminated by moonlight. I felt along the bottom drawer, discovering the false bottom Grandpa had mentioned. Taped underneath was a yellowed envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. Inside was a brief letter. "My dearest Livy, asterisk. If you're reading this, I've moved on to join your grandmother. Don't grieve too long. We had a good run together, you and I, asterisk. There are things happening that you need to know about. Your parents remortgaged their portion of the property years ago to cover some unfortunate investment decisions. Lucas has debts that would make a gambling man blush. They're planning to sell everything as soon as possible. Asterisk. There are important documents in the old fire safe behind the loose brick in the basement, third from the left in the wine cellar wall. The combination is your birthday. Asterisk. Remember what I always told you, possession is 9/10 of the law, but love is the whole of legacy. Asterisk. All my love. Asterisk. Grandpa asterisk. I clutched the letter to my chest, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to fit together. The developer, my family's secretive behavior, their rush to liquidate Grandpa's belongings. They weren't just mourning differently than I was. They were executing a plan. With new determination, I quietly made my way to the basement, finding the loose brick exactly where Grandpa described. Inside the hidden safe was another envelope, thicker than the first, and an old leather-bound photo album I'd never seen before. I returned to my room, heart pounding, knowing that whatever these documents contained would change everything. As dawn broke over the property, casting golden light across the fields Grandpa had loved so dearly, I made a promise to his memory. I would not let them erase what he had built. The leather album was filled with photographs I'd never seen before. Grandpa as a young man standing proudly in front of the house with his parents, the original deed framed on the wall behind them. There were detailed records of improvements made to the property over decades, newspaper clippings about agricultural awards, and most surprisingly, pictures of me as a child helping Grandpa plant trees, fix fences, and tend gardens. A visual history of my connection to the land that my parents and Lucas had never bothered to forge. But it was the documents in the envelope that truly took my breath away. Bank statements showing massive withdrawals from my parents' accounts to cover Lucas's emergencies. A partially signed contract with Westfield Development Corporation dated 3 months before Grandpa's death, with notes in my father's handwriting calculating potential profits from subdividing the property. A demand letter from a casino in Atlantic City addressing Lucas's outstanding debt of over $200,000. I sat on my childhood bed, documents spread around me, feeling like I was seeing my family clearly for the first time. The favoritism toward Lucas wasn't just emotional. They had been systematically sacrificing the family's financial stability to maintain his lifestyle and cover his mistakes. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to visit Harold Winters, Grandpa's oldest friend and attorney, who lived in town. Harold welcomed me with genuine warmth, his eyes crinkling with the same kindness I remembered from childhood visits. "I've been expecting you," he said, ushering me into his modest office. "Theodore said you'd come looking for answers eventually." Over coffee in mismatched mugs, Harold confirmed what the documents had suggested. My parents had been in financial trouble for years, making increasingly risky investments to maintain their image of success. Lucas had gambling debts that had grown to dangerous proportions, with some very unsavory characters beginning to apply pressure. "Your grandfather was heartbroken when he found out they were planning to sell as soon as he passed," Harold said, shaking his head. "Not because of the property itself, mind you, but because of what it represented. 5 generations of your family's history and hard work." "Why didn't he confront them?" I asked. Harold's eyes twinkled. Theodore was never one for confrontation. He preferred to solve problems creatively. He wouldn't elaborate further, saying only that Grandpa had made arrangements and that I should continue my investigation. As I left his office, Harold called after me. "Olivia, your grandfather was incredibly proud of you. Remember that in the days ahead." Back at the house, I noticed Lucas had become increasingly territorial, giving impromptu tours to potential investors, showing off the property as if it already belonged to him alone. When I questioned why strangers were walking through Grandpa's home less than 2 weeks after his funeral, Lucas's friendly mask slipped. "Mind your own business, Olivia," he snapped. "You don't live here anymore. You're just visiting." That evening, I overheard my parents and Lucas in my father's study, their voices carrying through the old heating vents. The developer needs an answer by next week, my father was saying. They're offering cash, no contingencies. What about Olivia? My mother asked, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Lucas scoffed. What about her? She doesn't have any say in this. The property will pass to you two when the will is read tomorrow, and then we can proceed with the sale. She's getting attached to the place, my mother said. You know how she was with Theodore. Then we need to make it clear she has no future here, Lucas replied firmly. I'll handle it at dinner tomorrow. Trust me. The next day passed in tense silence. I noticed my mother watching me carefully as I wandered the property, taking photographs and making notes. My father spent the day in town, presumably meeting with Harold about the will reading scheduled for the following morning. Lucas disappeared for several hours, returning with a smug expression that set my nerves on edge. Dinner that night was an elaborate affair, with my mother preparing all my favorites, a transparent attempt to soften whatever blow they planned to deliver. We ate in the formal dining room, a space usually reserved for holidays and special occasions. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier light. Silver cutlery clinked against fine china. The extravagant setting only highlighted the artifice of the moment. As we finished the main course, Lucas cleared his throat and set down his napkin with deliberate slowness. His eyes, so similar to my father's, fixed on me with calculated coldness. Olivia, he began, voice dripping with false concern, we need to discuss your situation. My mother studied her wine glass. My father straightened his silverware, avoiding my gaze. My situation? I repeated, already knowing what was coming. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on the table, a rule-breaking gesture our mother would normally reprimand, but now ignored. The thing is, he continued, with Grandpa gone, changes need to happen. The property is going to Mom and Dad tomorrow, and we have plans for it. My father finally spoke. We're considering an offer from developers. It makes financial sense for everyone. Everyone except Grandpa, I pointed out quietly. He loved this land. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Lucas cut in sharply. The decision's been made. His smirk returned as he delivered the line I'd overheard him rehearsing, you have 1 week to leave. My parents sat in complicit silence, tacitly endorsing his cruelty with their failure to object. In that moment, surrounded by the beautiful table settings and family heirlooms, I realized we had become strangers connected only by genetics, not love. I see, I said simply, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten dessert. Is there anything else? My calm response clearly disappointed Lucas, who had expected tears or pleading. He recovered quickly, though. Actually, yes. Any of Grandpa's things you want, take them now. The estate company comes Monday. With that final twist of the knife, he raised his glass in a mock toast. To new beginnings. I excused myself from the table, retreating to my room where the documents from Grandpa's safe waited. Tomorrow would bring the reading of the will, and with it, revelations none of them were prepared for. The next morning, tension hung thick in the air as we gathered in Harold Winter's office for the reading of Grandpa's will. My parents dressed impeccably as always, projecting confidence and appropriate solemnity. Lucas wore an expensive suit with a pocket square that matched his silk tie, looking more like he was attending a business merger than a family matter. I chose simple, professional attire, a navy pantsuit that Grandpa had always said made me look capable and strong. Harold greeted us with professional courtesy, though I noticed his smile tightened when he shook Lucas's hand. We settled into the leather chairs arranged before his desk, the room smelling of old books and furniture polish. Before we begin, Harold said, adjusting his reading glasses, I want to express again my personal condolences. Theodore was not just my client but my dear friend for over 50 years. My father nodded impatiently. Yes, thank you, Harold. We all miss him terribly. Shall we proceed? The initial portions of the will were straightforward, specific bequests of personal items and small monetary gifts to distant relatives and charity organizations Grandpa had supported. My parents shifted restlessly, waiting for the main event, the disposition of the property. Lucas checked his watch repeatedly, no doubt calculating how quickly they could proceed with the sale once ownership transferred. When Harold reached that section, he paused, took a sip of water, and looked directly at me before continuing. Regarding the Bennett family property, including the main residence, all outbuildings, and the surrounding 120 acres. My father leaned forward slightly. My mother's knuckles whitened as she gripped her purse. Theodore James Bennett, having already legally transferred ownership of said property in its entirety to his granddaughter, Olivia Grace Bennett, 3 months prior to his death, makes no further disposition of this asset as it is no longer part of his estate. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the antique clock on Harold's bookshelf ticking away seconds that felt like hours. My father was the first to break the spell. "What did you say?" he demanded, voice cracking. Harold removed his glasses. "The property was transferred to Olivia 3 months ago. The deed has been recorded with the county. It's all legal and binding." "That's impossible," my mother whispered. "He wouldn't do that." "There must be some mistake," Lucas added, color draining from his face. Grandpa wasn't in his right mind toward the end. Harold's expression hardened. Theodore was of completely sound mind, as certified by 2 independent physicians and witnessed by myself and my partner. He knew exactly what he was doing. My father turned to me, eyes blazing. "Did you know about this? Did you manipulate him when he was vulnerable?" Before I could respond, Harold intervened. "Thomas, I'd advise against making accusations you can't support. Theodore approached me about this transfer last year. It was his idea, his decision, and his right as the sole owner of the property." "But why?" my mother asked, looking at me with new wariness. "Why would he cut out his own son?" Harold glanced at me, silently asking if I wanted him to continue. I nodded slightly. "Theodore left a letter explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it?" "Yes," I said quietly as my family stared in shock. Harold removed an envelope from the file and began reading. "To my family, asterisk. If Harold is reading this letter, then the transfer of property to my granddaughter Olivia has come as a surprise to most of you. That was intentional, asterisk. I've watched with growing concern as the property that has been in our family for generations has been leveraged and mortgaged to cover financial mistakes and bailouts. I've seen plans drawn up to divide and sell the land while I was still drawing breath. I've witnessed the disregard for legacy and stewardship that I tried to instill in all of you, asterisk. Olivia is the only one who has shown genuine love for this place and understanding of its value beyond dollars and cents. She has demonstrated responsibility, integrity, and vision, qualities essential for preserving what the Bennetts have built over generations, asterisk. Thomas and Rebecca, I love you as my son and daughter-in-law, but I cannot entrust this legacy to you knowing your intentions. Lucas, I love you as my grandson, but you have consistently shown that you value immediate gratification over long-term responsibility, asterisk. This decision wasn't made lightly or in haste. It represents my final effort to preserve something precious that would otherwise be lost forever, asterisk. With love and hope for understanding, asterisk. Theodore James Bennett, asterisk. When Harold finished, my father stood abruptly, face flushed with anger. This is elder abuse. We'll contest it. You're welcome to try, Harold replied calmly. But I assure you, everything was done properly. Theodore was very thorough. Lucas lunged toward me, finger pointing accusingly. You manipulated him. You turned him against us. I remained seated, meeting his gaze steadily. I didn't know about this until yesterday. Grandpa made this decision on his own. Liar. Lucas shouted. You've always been jealous of me. Always playing the victim while scheming behind our backs. My mother placed a restraining hand on Lucas's arm. We need to discuss this privately. Harold, we'll be in touch through our attorney. As they gathered their belongings to leave, I remained seated. Harold gave me an encouraging nod. Actually, I said, causing them to pause at the door, there's something else you should know. I removed the documents I discovered from my bag. I found these in Grandpa's safe. They show that you've already accepted a non-refundable deposit of $250,000 from Westfield Development for property you didn't own. That could constitute fraud. My father's face paled. We assumed the property would pass to us. It was a reasonable expectation. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but signing contracts for property you don't own is still legally problematic. And Lucas, these casino markers suggest you've used the property as collateral for loans you had no authority to secure. Lucas's expression transformed from anger to fear. Those are private financial matters. Not when they involve property that belongs to me, I replied. I've consulted with an attorney of my own. Given these circumstances, I'm giving you all 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from my home. 24 hours? My mother gasped. That's impossible. We've lived there for 30 years. Actually, Harold interjected gently, the main house has been Olivia's legal residence for 3 months. You've essentially been her guest since then. My father took my mother's elbow, steering her toward the door. This isn't over, Olivia. Not by a long shot. As they departed, tension crackling in their wake, I exhaled slowly, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. This wasn't how I'd imagined things would go, but Grandpa had entrusted me with his legacy, and I wouldn't let him down. Harold poured 2 small glasses of bourbon from a desk drawer, Grandpa's favorite. Theodore said you'd handle this with grace and strength. He was right. We clinked glasses in a bittersweet toast to the man who had seen what the rest of my family had missed in me and who had trusted me to carry forward what he valued most. I returned to the property, my property, later that afternoon, steeling myself for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. The house was unusually quiet when I entered, but I could feel the tension vibrating through the old walls like an approaching storm. Following muffled voices, I found my family in the sunroom that overlooked the back acreage. They were huddled around the coffee table, papers spread before them, speaking in urgent tones that ceased abruptly when I appeared in the doorway. Well, if it isn't our new landlord, Lucas sneered, though his usual confidence had fractured, revealing the insecurity beneath. My mother looked up, her perfect makeup unable to conceal her reddened eyes. Olivia, we need to talk sensibly about this situation. Yes, my father added, adopting his business negotiation voice. There are factors you haven't considered. Financial implications. Family obligations. I moved further into the room, noticing they had already begun sorting through items, sticky notes marking various pieces of furniture and artwork. They were dividing the spoils even as they plotted to regain control. I've considered everything very carefully, I replied, setting my bag on a side table. And I've brought someone who can help explain the legal situation more clearly. On cue, Patricia Goldman, the attorney I'd consulted earlier that morning, appeared in the doorway. She was a formidable woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the confident posture of someone unaccustomed to losing. Ms. Goldman is a specialist in property law and estate transfers, I explained, making introductions. She's here to answer any questions and to witness our discussion. My father's expression darkened. We don't need another lawyer present for a family conversation. I disagree, I said simply. Patricia, would you explain the current legal standing of the property? She nodded professionally. The Bennett property was legally transferred to Olivia Bennett through an irrevocable deed transfer 3 months ago. The transfer was properly recorded with the county and all appropriate taxes paid. Ms. Bennett is the sole legal owner of the property and all structures upon it. Theodore wasn't thinking clearly, my mother interjected. He was on heavy medication. Patricia shook her head. Mr. Bennett underwent comprehensive cognitive assessment before executing the transfer. 2 independent physicians certified his capacity, and the entire transaction was videotaped as additional protection against exactly this type of challenge. Lucas pounded his fist on the table. This is ridiculous. Grandpa wouldn't have cut us out completely. Olivia must have manipulated him. I withdrew a sealed envelope from my bag. Grandpa anticipated you might say that. This is a letter he wrote to be opened if his decision was challenged. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a DVD labeled "For My Family" in Grandpa's handwriting, along with another letter. I read it aloud. My dear family, asterisk. If you're watching this recording, it means you're questioning my decision to transfer the property to Olivia. I'm saddened but not surprised, asterisk. I've included a video of myself explaining my reasons, recorded the day before the transfer was executed. I've also included documentation of the financial decisions that led to this point, the remortgaging of the property against my wishes, the loans taken in my name without my knowledge, and the plans to sell that were hidden from me, asterisk. I hope this brings clarity, if not acceptance, asterisk. With love despite disappointment, asterisk. Theodore, asterisk. Patricia produced a laptop from her briefcase and inserted the DVD. Grandpa's face appeared on the screen, thinner than in his healthy days, but with eyes bright and voice strong. He spoke directly to the camera, explaining in meticulous detail his reasons for the transfer. He described discovering the plans to sell, finding unauthorized loan documents, and witnessing years of financial mismanagement. Olivia is the only one who has shown true love for this place, he said, his image looking out at us from beyond the grave. She understands that some things have value beyond money. I'm entrusting her with our family's legacy because she's earned that trust, while others have repeatedly broken it. When the video ended, silence filled the room. My mother was openly crying now. My father stared at the blank screen, jaw tight. Lucas paced by the windows, tension radiating from him. There's more, I said quietly, laying out copies of the documents I'd found. The deposit you accepted from Westfield Development. The loan agreements using this property as collateral. The gambling debts. It's all here. My father attempted one last defense. We were protecting the family, making necessary financial decisions. You were protecting yourselves and enabling Lucas, I corrected gently, at the expense of Grandpa's wishes and the legacy he valued. So what happens now? My mother asked, voice small. You're throwing us out of our home? This hasn't been your home legally for 3 months, Patricia reminded her. And given the documented attempts to sell property that wasn't yours to sell, Ms. Bennett would be within her rights to involve law enforcement. Lucas snorted. You wouldn't dare. We're family. I met his gaze steadily. Family respects each other. Family doesn't scheme and manipulate. Family doesn't issue ultimatums over dinner tables. Turning to address all 3 of them, I continued, you have 24 hours to collect your personal belongings. Anything on this property that isn't removed by noon tomorrow becomes mine by default. 24 hours is impossible, my mother protested. We have 30 years of belongings here. Then I suggest you focus on what's truly important to you, I replied. Just like Grandpa had to do when he made his decision. My father, ever the pragmatist, recognized defeat when he saw it. Come, Rebecca. We need to start packing. As they moved toward the door, Lucas lingered, his expression vacillating between rage and panic. You can't do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my brother. Despite everything, he was still the boy who'd built blanket forts with me during thunderstorms, who'd taught me to ride a bike before our paths diverged. You're resourceful, Lucas. You always have been, I said. But your choices have consequences. It's time you face them. After they dispersed to begin the painful process of sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, Patricia squeezed my shoulder supportively. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, especially against family. Watching the sun set over the fields that were now indisputably mine, I felt no triumph, only resolve. Grandpa had entrusted me with more than land and buildings. He'd entrusted me with preserving something precious that would have otherwise been lost to greed and short-sightedness. As night fell over the property, I wandered through rooms suddenly empty of the tension that had filled them for years, making mental notes of changes I wanted to implement. Not to erase my family's presence, but to honor Grandpa's vision and create something meaningful from this painful transition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for tonight, I sat on the porch swing where Grandpa and I had spent countless hours, and I allowed myself to feel the full weight of both the responsibility and the opportunity he had placed in my hands. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that had always made Grandpa say, "The good Lord is showing off today." I rose early, preparing myself for what would undoubtedly be a difficult day. By 8 o'clock, a stream of vehicles had begun arriving, my mother's friends helping to pack her treasured collections, my father's business associates loading furniture into rented trucks, and a team of movers Lucas had somehow managed to hire overnight. The house buzzed with activity and barely suppressed emotion. My mother approached me in the kitchen, where I was quietly making coffee, her eyes puffy from crying. "Most of these things have been in the family for generations," she said, gesturing to the china cabinet. "Are you sure you won't reconsider the timeline?" "The timeline stands," I replied firmly. "But I'm not unreasonable, Mom. Family heirlooms should stay with family. I'm only asking you to take your personal belongings." Her expression softened slightly. "What about the silver service? Your grandmother would want me to have it." "Take it," I said. "I'm not trying to strip you of everything. I just need you to respect that this property is mine now, and decisions about its future are mine to make." As she carefully wrapped the silver pieces in cloth, she asked quietly, "Where did we go wrong with you, Olivia?" "We gave you everything." The question was so disconnected from reality that I nearly laughed. "You gave Lucas everything. You gave me independence by default, not by design. And I'm grateful for that now, even if it hurt then." She looked genuinely confused. "We always trusted you to handle things yourself." Lucas needed more support. Lucas needed boundaries, I corrected gently. And I needed parents who showed up. We both lost out. She had no response to that, retreating with her carefully wrapped silver to continue packing elsewhere. My father was more pragmatic, focusing on logistics rather than emotions. He cornered me in Grandpa's study, where I was preserving important documents. "The developers won't just walk away," he warned. "That deposit was substantial. They'll expect either the property or compensation. Their contract was with you for property you didn't own," I reminded him. "But I'm not heartless. I've already spoken with their legal team. They'll get their deposit back from me, not because I have to, but because it's the right thing to do." He studied me with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time the capable woman I'd become rather than the daughter he'd overlooked. "You've thought of everything," he said, something like respect reluctantly entering his voice. "I learned from watching you and Grandpa," I replied. "I saw what to do and what not to do." He nodded stiffly and returned to his packing, our relationship forever altered, but perhaps not entirely broken. Lucas proved the most volatile, alternating between threats and desperate bargaining. By mid-morning, he cornered me on the back porch, his voice low and dangerous. "I've spoken to an attorney of my own," he hissed. "There are ways to challenge this. Undue influence. Diminished capacity. Challenge all you want," I responded calmly. "Grandpa made sure everything was legally airtight. I'll tell everyone how you manipulated him," he threatened. "Your precious architecture firm won't want the scandal." I smiled sadly. "Do you really think my colleagues would believe I somehow hoodwinked Grandpa? The man everyone describes as sharp as a tack until his final days? The man who outsmarted you and our parents from beyond the grave." His facade cracked slightly. "I'm your brother, Olivia. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counted for everything with Grandpa," I pointed out. "He left you his vintage car collection and a substantial trust fund, which you'd know if you'd stayed for the complete reading of the will. He didn't disinherit you, he just wouldn't let you destroy what he'd spent his life building." This news visibly stunned Lucas. "What?" "There's a trust fund. Accessible when you complete a financial management program and maintain sobriety for 1 year, I explained. He was trying to help you, not punish you. Lucas sank onto the porch steps, the fight temporarily draining from him. So he knew about the gambling. He knew everything, Lucas. He just loved us anyway. As noon approached, the exodus of belongings accelerated. Neighbors watched curiously from a distance as the Bennett family drama played out in moving vans and hurried trips carrying boxes. Patricia returned to ensure there were no last-minute legal issues, bringing with her an unexpected visitor, Harold Winters. "I thought you might need moral support," Harold explained, settling into a wicker chair on the porch as the final items were removed. "This can't be easy." "It's not," I admitted. "Part of me feels guilty. They're still my family." Harold nodded thoughtfully. Theodore struggled with the same feelings. He didn't make this decision lightly or quickly. He gave them many chances to change course. Did he know how much conflict this would cause? He hoped it might eventually lead to healing, Harold replied. Sometimes a clean break is necessary before true reconciliation can begin. At precisely noon, Patricia confirmed that the deadline had arrived. My parents stood stiffly by their packed car in the circular driveway, Lucas leaning against his sports car nearby. I descended the porch steps to meet them, feeling the weight of the moment. "We've left keys on the kitchen counter," my father said formally. "I've transferred all the utility accounts to your name." My mother stepped forward awkwardly. "There's a list of maintenance issues we've been meaning to address." "It's with the keys." I nodded, maintaining composure. "Thank you. I'll take care of everything." Lucas approached last, hands in his pockets. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat lacked his earlier venom. "It can be," I offered. "Grandpa wanted to help you, Lucas." The trust fund conditions weren't punishment. They were a lifeline. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps recognition, perhaps just fatigue. Without another word, he got into his car and drove away. My parents followed shortly after, my mother turning for one last look at the house before they disappeared down the long driveway. As their vehicles vanished from sight, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion, not triumph or vindication, but a complex mixture of grief and relief. Patricia and Harold respectfully withdrew, leaving me alone on the property that was now indisputably mine. I spent the remainder of that day walking the boundaries of the land, reacquainting myself with the streams and wooded areas, the old apple orchard and the rolling meadows. With each step, I felt Grandpa's presence and his trust in me solidifying into purpose. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Olivia Bennett?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is." "Who's calling?" "My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I was a friend of your grandfather's from the Historical Society. I heard about what happened today. News travels fast in small towns, and I wanted to reach out." Over the next hour, Eleanor shared stories about Grandpa I'd never heard before. How he'd fought a developer 20 years earlier who wanted to build a shopping center on historic farmland. How he'd quietly paid college tuition for local kids whose families were struggling. How he'd spoken often and proudly of his granddaughter who understood the value of preservation and stewardship. That call was the first of many. Over the following days, people from the community reached out, some offering support, others sharing memories, a few expressing concern about my plans for the property. I listened to them all, recognizing that Grandpa's legacy extended far beyond our family boundaries. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath unfolded. As predicted, my parents' attorney filed a challenge to the property transfer, but it was quickly dismissed when Patricia presented the extensive documentation Grandpa had prepared. The developers threatened litigation, but settled for the return of their deposit plus a small fee. Lucas disappeared for several weeks, only to return with a subdued request to discuss his trust fund conditions. Throughout it all, I remained steady in my vision for the property, drawing up plans that honored both its history and its potential. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be, carrying forward a legacy with both roots and wings. 1 year later, I stood on the newly restored porch of the farmhouse, watching as volunteers planted the final trees in what was now the Theodore Bennett Community Orchard. The property had undergone a remarkable transformation, not into the luxury housing development my family had envisioned, but into something that balanced preservation with purpose. The main house had been carefully restored, maintaining its historic character while incorporating sustainable features. Solar panels discreetly positioned on the carriage house roof provided much of our electricity. A rainwater collection system fed the gardens and orchards. The barn had been converted into a community education center where classes on sustainable agriculture and historic preservation were already filling up weeks in advance. Turning the property into something that served both past and future hadn't been easy. There were permits to obtain, grants to write, and countless meetings with county officials and community members. But with each obstacle overcome, I felt Grandpa's presence guiding me forward. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something cautious but civil. After their legal challenge failed, they moved to a condominium in the city, downsizing significantly from the lifestyle they'd maintained for decades. My father, facing retirement with diminished resources, had reluctantly taken a consulting position with a smaller firm. My mother, surprisingly, had found purpose volunteering at a local museum, her knowledge of antiques and history finally finding constructive outlet. Our interactions were limited to occasional phone calls and carefully orchestrated holiday gatherings at neutral locations. The wound was healing, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder of choices made and consequences faced. "The apple trees look beautiful," said a voice behind me, interrupting my thoughts. I turned to find Lucas standing at the bottom of the porch steps, looking healthier than I'd seen him in years. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully cultivated image of success. Instead, he wore simple jeans and a flannel shirt, his hair shorter, his eyes clearer. "They do," I agreed, surprised by his unexpected visit. "Grandpa would be pleased." Lucas climbed the steps slowly, hands in his pockets. "I completed the financial management program last week. 1 year of sobriety next month." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That couldn't have been easy." He shrugged, a gesture reminiscent of the brother I'd known before money and status became his primary concerns. "Harder than I expected. Easier than continuing the way I was." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the volunteers working together, laughing and calling to each other as they finished the planting. "Harold called me," Lucas finally said. "The trust fund conditions have been met. I'll have access next month." I nodded. "Grandpa would be proud of you. He always believed you could turn things around." "I'm not using it the way Mom and Dad expect," he continued. "They think I'll buy back into their lifestyle. Get the condo next to theirs, rejoin the country club." "What are you planning instead?" I asked, genuinely curious. Lucas smiled, a real smile without the cynical edge I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "I'm going back to school, finishing my degree in environmental science. Then maybe looking into land conservation work." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Grandpa would definitely approve of that," I said with a small laugh. "I've been thinking a lot about him this year," Lucas admitted. "About what he valued and why. About the kind of man he was versus the kind of man I was becoming." He gestured toward the property spread out before us. "What you've done here, it's what he would have wanted. I see that now." His words touched something deep within me, a desire for healing that had persisted despite everything that had happened. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. "There's been a lot of changes since you were here last." As we walked the property together, I pointed out the various projects completed and in progress. The community garden plots already claimed by local families. The restored creek with its new fish habitat. The workshop where Grandpa's tools were once again being used to create and repair rather than sitting idle or being sold off. It's not just about preserving the past, I explained as we reached the education center. It's about creating something sustainable for the future. Something that honors what came before while recognizing that nothing stays exactly the same. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. I get it now. I didn't before, but I do now. When we returned to the house, the volunteers had finished their work and were sharing a celebratory lunch on the wide lawn. Eleanor Mitchell, now a dear friend and regular presence on the property, waved us over. Come join us. We're toasting the completion of the orchard. As we approached the gathering, I was struck by the community that had formed around this place in just 1 year. Master gardeners sharing knowledge with novices. Retired craftspeople teaching traditional skills to eager students. Children exploring the same fields and streams where I had played as a child. This was the true legacy Grandpa had entrusted to me, not just land and buildings, but the opportunity to create connection and continuity in a world that often valued neither. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and Lucas had departed with a tentative promise to return for the Harvest Festival, I sat alone on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance over the fields. The property was quiet now, but it was a living quiet, full of potential and purpose rather than the stagnant silence of neglect it had known before. I pulled out the letter Grandpa had left me, now worn from frequent reading, and traced his familiar handwriting with my finger. Remember what I always told you, possession is 9/10 of the law, but love is the whole of legacy. Asterisk. In the year since claiming this property as my own, I'd learned that ownership was about far more than legal rights or physical possession. True ownership came with responsibility to the land, to history, to community, and to future generations who would someday walk these same paths. The painful confrontation with my family had been necessary, not because property mattered more than people, but because integrity sometimes requires difficult boundaries. Standing my ground hadn't been about winning or punishing. It had been about honoring a trust placed in me and refusing to let momentary comfort override lasting value. As darkness fell completely, I made my way inside the house that now felt truly like my home. Not because my family had been excluded, but because the space had been reclaimed for its intended purpose, a place of stewardship rather than consumption. The journey of healing wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be completely. But with each day that passed, the wound left by betrayal and confrontation scarred over a little more, creating strength where there had once been only pain. Grandpa had given me more than property. He'd given me the chance to discover my own capacity for resilience, forgiveness, and vision. In choosing me as his successor, he'd seen something I hadn't yet recognized in myself, the ability to transform loss into legacy and conflict into creation. As I closed the door on another day at Bennett Farm, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful lesson that had ultimately brought me home in every sense of the word. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most difficult packages. Sometimes losing what you thought was family allows you to find your true place in the world. Have you ever had to stand up to family members to protect something important to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. And remember, sometimes what feels like the end of everything is actually the beginning of something even better. Thank you for listening to my journey.